Welcome back to the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. I'm Shanae Trudeau here with Bhavani Maki for another conversation from the heart. You know what to do. If you like what you hear, please share this recording and tell a friend. Thank you so much for landing here and sharing your attention with us today on the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. Bhavani, we're back. Great to be here with you.
Great to be with you. I just want to really honor um, your your ability to craft questions because that's the yatra, right? That's the journey to the nexus point, and it's all about the question. And so, yeah, I'm excited.
Great. Well, thank you. I do agonize. I mean, spend a lot of time.
Agonize is better than being neurotic. I think that's a great reframing, right?
It's true. It's totally true. Thank you. So I've been thinking about something that you say in your trainings, or I've heard you say in past trainings, where you talk to your new and upcoming yoga teachers about not correcting a child in the asanas until the age of about 12. And I'd love to have you speak more on this.
Certainly. And I'll tell you, most of it is because my teacher told me so. And, when I asked further about it, it was because basically, it's like what we saw in the Yoga Sutra mentorship on the asana. If you take the joy out of asana, it's not really asana. Okay. Um, so letting kids play and they spontaneously will do yoga. They will spontaneously start to chant sutras or shlokas, and they have their own, baby talk and whatnot, and just let them be in their place of spontaneity, and praise them for that. What happens is a lot of times, and like as parents, it's our job to correct children, and that's a hard thing because you're trying to do it without squelching their fire or their spirit. And who knows, maybe they're going to innovate something in the future. So, like, really praising them for that and enjoying that process. So, we want to just allow them to be in their spontaneity because they're, just inhabiting their body. But around 12 is when the animal of their body starts changing. There's these hormonal impulses and there's things just percolating and the emotions get really intense, and they have this very animalistic impulse. I see it with my son. He starts getting really rough and I have to say, wait, I'm your mom, like, go beat up on your friends. I'm your mom and I'm an older mom. You have to be gentle with me, right? And it's just because he has like this burgeoning energy. He's not 12 yet, though. And so around 12 is like that brahmacharya phase. And so when we look at the ashramas or the refuges of life, there's different phases of life. In that early phase is where they're really learning to work with Brahman, which is, Brahman is this energy, this creative energy and impulse. And so, of course, as a parent, you're just like, oh my God, I don't want them to like knock someone up or get an STD or whatever, And it's a good time for them to really learn how to channel that energy. So then with the alignment principles and the sequencing, we're really working alchemically with their system to help them to distribute prana evenly through their body so that they're not just like this flaming hot root and, second chakra, which wants to go like put themselves out there and make more of themselves in the world, right? So it's like not getting, knocked up or knocking somebody else up, or even, being able to express that energy in a way where they're not going to join up with a pack and start playing with fire and set things on fire, or also there's a real impulse within us in which we want to alter our consciousness. So that's when kids might start, you know, experimenting with substances without discrimination. So it's a really appropriate time for them to develop their relationship with this powerful, potent energy that's within them. And as you and I know, that the yogi, the yogi shaman is really working with their endocrine system with intention, because this is where they're able to induce transpersonal states of consciousness and develop their capacity for insight and transmission. So this is where they're able to, like, certainly they're learning how to be a upstanding member in society, learning yama and niyama and all of those things, be how we work in community, how we can also take care of ourselves and our independence, right? But then really starting to work with the endocrine system in a way that balances us so that we're not then kicking out the jams in the world. So that's where I was taught, like, and this came from Baba Hari Das, it came from uh, Patabi Joyce. It's like, leave them alone, don't adjust them also, because they're really soft. So I mean, you could put and really, even some people are this way. We call them bendy wendies, and they're fun because you can put them in all these poses, but they don't have the nervous system to handle it. They don't have the stability, and it can really just start to fragment a person. And with littles, it's like their joints are still forming. There's things that are still cartilaginous, just letting them play and experiment. And, this is something that this is just from my perspective, what I observed in India, and perhaps you observed it too. And then I've observed it in like more Eastern cultures where there's a lot of permissiveness with little children. And perhaps it's because there's such an embedded sense of duty and of dharma within those cultures, and they're restrictive isn't really the right word, maybe prescribed ways of being and doing, and there's a strong sense of propriety within the culture that you just want them to enjoy the freedom before the burden of responsibility. So that's my understanding. And of course, that's because my teachers told me so. But then it felt right. It felt right within me. And that's the ultimate question that we have to ask. That's where it's helpful to have the support of our seniors, our senior students slash teachers who can give us this advice, because there's been lots of trial and error before. And then we sit with it and see, does it feel right for us? Yeah. So that's where that comes from.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it feels right for me too. And thank you for that, more of an explanation. And I think of, seeing the little kids doing dance at such a young age. And, part of me is in awe of their ability, but also it's that they're so malleable, like so young, and it no longer becomes play. And it's a little heartbreaking to see, and to really, it sucked the joy out of it too soon is too soon.
I used to teach at this Waldorf school, and it's not because I'm a Waldorf teacher or anything, but just because there was a lack of resources. So I was invited in, and there was this little boy, and he moved in the most incredible way. And he would just constantly dance. And it was no form, no style. It was so authentic. And it just got my cells vibrating and I felt his joy. And then he actually went on, he was taken up by Alvin Ailey's dance company, which was like, talk about like the pinnacle of having that opportunity. And then he returned kind of in his mid 20s, and his spirit was broken and his body was broken. And I just saw him a couple of days ago and he's like, I'm in so much pain. And I said, do you ever dance anymore? And he said, no, I can't dance anymore. It's, I have no desire to dance anymore. And it just was like, it's kind of a heartbreak,
Mhm.
I'm just letting them be who they are. How do we, it's such a hard thing, right? To allow somebody to unfold and to innovate and also to direct them. That's one of those tensions that we experience. Yeah. So,
Mm.
you know, yeah.
Yeah,
You don't want to
beautiful.
break their spirits or break their hearts or, there's already so much narrative, like tacit narrative that we're not enough or that we need to become something.
Yeah. And especially considering yoga as a shamanic path, really in that vein of like there's these rites of passage to be able to then take this up and in a way that we know what we're doing to some degree. Yeah.
Totally. And
Yeah.
and something else is also to appreciate where there are different phases of life, So that's where like, the Ashtanga Vinyasa form, Krishnamacharya was teaching young boys. And so like what a great way. I know for myself, like when I really got turned on to that practice, how old was I? I think I was like 24, and I had so much energy. I was bouncing off the walls, and it was the one thing that settled me. And it's really interesting also, to really appreciate. And I was listening to a talk from Marion Woodman, transpersonal Jungian psychologist, and she was talking about the change of life for women and how they experience perimenopause much more intensely because they haven't made peace with the fact that they're not going to be in their maidenhood forever. So it becomes very painful. And this is where you can just see like for me, I had to let go of that practice to get pregnant because I could just see I was much too sinewy, I was too muscly, I couldn't be like twisting my uterus, and I had to let go and create space. And it was painful because I really loved it and I loved being able to do all those things. And um, but like if we just keep on hanging on to that kind of a practice and not appreciate the aging process. I was talking to one of my friends who's like pushing 80, and she has a tenant, and it's this woman who's like in her 70s, and she's tight and she looks great, in a bikini. And I was like, wow, look at her. And she said, Bhavani, you have no idea. It's a full-time job for her to maintain that form. Like it's all she does. So eventually, it's like we have to appreciate those shifts and let things go. And I mean, I'm pro ageism in that way.
Yeah.
And talk about letting go. I have decided finally I am no longer wearing a Busten halter, which if you don't know what that is, I love that word. It's German. It's the halter for your Bustens. Because I'm like, who am I kidding? And I just want to be able to breathe. So even that sense of like squeezing yourself into too tight clothing, and it's another form of like corseting ourselves. Eventually we're going to let that go and just be okay with it. So there's a timing is everything, a time and a place, and that kind of a practice is appropriate for somebody who has so much energy, doesn't know how to channel it, and then there's going to be a shift.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Timing is everything. Amen. And that's a great segue into my next question is about women who are pregnant and still doing yoga. So I've also been in trainings with you, and in attendance are other women in all stages of their pregnancy. And I've observed that your instruction for them is often somewhat different than for the rest of the class. Speaking about timing and in the next phase, can you speak more on working with pregnant women in their all trimesters of their pregnancy?
Yeah, this is a fascinating question because if you look, there's some schools of thought that say like a pregnant woman shouldn't even do Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward dog, because there's like a point zero. I'm making up this metric. I've never seen it. I've never heard of it happening, but apparently it could be a possibility where somehow air seeps into the uterus. And it's like, oh wow, okay, that's very interesting. I still teach it to pregnant women. However, what I'll have them do is, like forward bends tend to be contraindicated for pregnancy because you don't want anything that's going to compress the femoral arteries. The objective is to allow as much circulation to the fetus and to the uterus. So what you would have the person do is, like, let's say you're doing Uttanasana, is gradually the feet go wider apart. You turn the toes in. And what this does is it helps to support the inner legs and the bandha, which keeps, because everything apana starts kicking in when, during pregnancy, or at least, certainly during, like for childbirth, that's when apana is that downward movement, as well as lactation. You're in that place. And so it helps to create a supportive environment. And also, what we're looking to do is, the obliques tend to get really short as the front body spreads. And for those of you who are on video, I have this picture.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
It's
look how humongous I am, right?
Bhavani is humongous. It's her huge pregnant belly.
And you can see how
Huge.
narrow my waist is in the back,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what we want to do is really work on the sideline, which I believe is true for all of us, but particularly during pregnancy. So you would have them spread their feet apart and then put their hands on bricks or on a surface. And it's about getting length from the navel to the sternum. This area tends to really shorten. And, when you're pregnant, it's like it actually becomes a really functional, it's like a great place to put a laundry basket or a grocery bag. And then the nursing process as well, and all the cradling of the baby, we tend to get really short in the chest. So you would have the hands on the bricks. Let's say you're doing Parshvottanasana, okay? And it's the sense of the yekam position where you inhale up and you're creating that length in the front of the spine. So you wouldn't forward bend. You certainly wouldn't twist. You don't want to do any wringing out of the uterus. You could do a twist, not where you're compressing the front of your body, but if you recall, like what we call the prego twist, where you lay down on your sideline on one hip, and then you lengthen through your waist and you can put your chest on the bolster. So it's never compressive. Now, I do have this Iyengar book on pregnancy, and you would not believe the things they're having these people do, you know? I mean, it's really kind of astounding. But this is, of course, this is for somebody who already has, a very cultivated practice. So they also say, like, don't teach inversions to someone who's pregnant. However, if someone already had an inversion practice, it can feel great because there's so much fluid that collects in the lower extremities. Many women, they actually have edema in their legs. And so just allowing let me think, the venous system to open with gravity and to get that circulation of fluids in the body. And I remember Rama saying, and she had 5 babies, that her last baby, she was doing all of these back bends. So back bends can be iffy because the round ligament that supports the uterus around the 4th or 5th month, the woman starts producing more relaxin, which makes the ligaments soft. And, so we have to be careful about those ligaments, and back bends can overstretch that round ligament in the uterus.
Mm.
So, I think supported back bends can be okay. But Rama shared that she was doing all of these back bends during her pregnancy, and she kept creating more and more space for the baby. And she was pregnant for 11 months. And then finally
Wow.
she was like, okay, I better stop because this baby has just got so much space to grow. And then the baby comes out with all, I think it's Vernex. It's like comes out like furry when they're really,
Yeah.
when they've been cooking a long time. So I think it's a case by case kind of scenario. And the big challenge, I think, for some women who have a really rigorous practice is being able to let some of that go. You are going to be a different animal. You're, I remember being pregnant and, dealing with the nausea and all of that and talking to my OB. And she said, well, it's like your body views it as a parasite in your body because it's feeding off of your system. So it's kind of like struggling, to accommodate and to adapt. And then she added, and they will be a parasite for the next 18 years. So you really have to adapt. And I think it's best to um, err on the cautious side. Another thing that I want to mention is if there's any spotting, and there can be spotting. I mean, during that implantation period. And I remember when Nico implanted in my womb, I felt it.
Wow.
And it literally felt like, when you have like a really crispy apple and you take that first bite and it goes, and I felt that in my uterine wall. Like I felt him take a bite into me and just like hang on. And, sometimes there can be spotting during those phases. If there's spotting, particularly during the first trimester, no supta virasana. It's such a tentative time. And if you want to keep this pregnancy, then, you just need to support it and start getting out of your own agenda. And, even like, this was some good advice from a veteran mother, which was like, I was teaching through my pregnancy and huge, and then I was like, well, I'm going to take 2 weeks off before the due date. And she was like, they're not born on the due date. Like that baby could be born tomorrow. You have no idea. And you start to realize that like, it's all about timing, and it's not even your timing anymore.
Yeah.
It's really like you have to really let go of how, especially as yogis, where we like to have a certain sense of ritual and timing and order. You're going to be letting go of all of that, and even sleep and certain foods. It's just a big shift, but it's so beautiful because I just realized what a total narcissist I was up until that point. It was like, what do I feel? What do I need? What do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? And then it really isn't about that. And that's why it's such a high yoga. And you do it out of love.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's like, when I look back, and this isn't what you asked, but I'm sharing, I feel so so blessed that I was able to do everything I wanted to do like 3 times. And basically, I just remember being in Paris and teaching in Paris and writing my book in a cafe and like I'd been doing it for years and I was just like, you know what? I feel like I've maximized this. Like I've kind of like maximized my individualistic experience. And now I'm really ready to rotate my life to like for me personally, I just felt like I wouldn't have the experience, the experience of love in its full expression. This is personal to me until I had that baby. And thinking back, it's like if I had gotten pregnant really young, I personally feel like I would have maybe had a lot of resentment for that kid because I would have felt unrealized in the things that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
And then it
So,
really isn't about you.
yeah.
Even though
Yeah.
as I tell like the father to be, I'm like, it's all about the mom. Like the mom's job is to take care of the baby and the dad's job is to take care of the mom.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So the next rite of passage, the arcteric or the menopausal years, how does one's practice change then?
Really good question. You know, there's there's different research on that. They say it's actually really good to do things that are more rigorous and get some like calisthenics in. And that's where, Surya Namaskara, it's described as being a panacea. And I know when I discovered it, it was really helpful for me because there is mental depression in my genetics and I could see that, and it was one thing that was able to kind of get me out of the funk and get prana circulating. It's also, it's really a bhakti practice. It's a devotional practice, like being a mother, where you rotate from egocentricity and you're rotating towards the sun. You're rotating towards something bigger. In the traditional Surya Namaskara, there's even mantras, and you say the different names for Surya. Om Mitraya Namaha, the one who is friendly to all. Om Kagayam Namaha, the one who energizes movement, the one who moves across the sky, the passage of time, and you're calling on all of these aspects of Surya. And it's said to be like reestablishing your umbilicus
Wow.
back to source. It's a devotional practice. So, that I think is actually really helpful. You don't always feel like it. People are different, and some people tend to get really thin, it seems like, during menopause. And aging is a process of you go more into a vata phase. So you have less viscosity, less elasticity in your system. Then there's what was I going to say here? So, and then some people get bigger. and they have like all of this fluid in their body. And I remember I put on like 20 pounds and I was just like, oh my God. And I couldn't like get it off of me. And some of my big sisters, they said, oh, you're just going to be fat for 2 years. Like, just accept it. But, in that process, there were a lot of dietary changes that had to occur for me. I couldn't drink caffeine anymore. It was like the sleep disturbance. There was a lot of shifts in my system. So I did have to make dietary changes, and then I've been able to gradually add things back in, but not everything. And then inversions are really, really beneficial because of the way they affect the master glands. And a supported shoulder stand, supported back bends and things like that. But really, as we come into that ashrama of life, it's about pranayama. And I don't just pranayama, we've been studying these sutras on pranayama. It's not just about breath control, but about really feeling how we work with our personal energy field. And hopefully at this point, maybe, you have decades of practice, so you have enough understanding of svadharma of yourself and what supports you, and you can work alchemically with it. But there's definitely going to be a shift in practice. And one of the like pranayama, and we do that is through chanting the shastras and the shlokas. And this is where we can get advice. And it's also really reaffirming because Patanjali speaks about wisdom. Yeah, we've all been seeded with wisdom, but it's ungrounded, it's unactualized, it's untested. And so the wisdom that he speaks about is seasoned wisdom. So it's like, okay, I can see where, oh yeah, I'm losing my perky little titties and my perky little butt and my tight little, arms and whatnot, and all the pretty surface things of yoga or of just youth. But I've been developing this rich inner life, and to really like plant your garden there and grow in that place. So, chanting is a form of pranayama, and it also reaffirms the arc of our full realization, which is, of course, the grand adventure of going into the afterlife, and how much cleanup work we've done within ourselves so that we don't encumber the other generations who are going to carry unmetabolized grief or trauma or feelings of frustration or the sense of a life unlived.
Mm. Amen. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about the next phase, the very elderly and or the injured? Is it appropriate for these groups? I mean, again, it's specific and I'm being over general in my questions, but to attend regular classes, what are your thoughts on the very aged and the injured?
I remember Patabi Joyce sharing that one of his school colleagues came to him in his 90s and wanted to learn yoga. And, he was having a hard time moving, and he was like really enjoying it, and just using his body. Because I feel like, as we get older, we tend to become really specialized in what we do, and we almost kind of form like these ruts in what we do, how we do it, and how we move. So being able to explore new spatial relationships and to move our body like children, who just move for the sake of movement, just because their cells are popping, like the circuitry is just sprouting and opening. And so to keep that alive. And I feel like, a lot of reason why we go to class also is for the community. And I think it can be challenging for a teacher, certainly, to work with all different levels, but that's our challenge. And it's important that, the image that keeps coming to heart for me is like, I grew up in the sauna culture, mispronounced as sauna. It's a Finnish word. And I remember, I was just talking about this last Friday. We had some friends over and they were asking me about my experience. And I said, I remember the first sauna that I took, I was like maybe 4 or 5. And I just remember it was like on the Baltic Sea. And it was like the first time I was meeting my Finnish relatives. And two of my mother's 3 sisters were there and their kids. And my grandmother was there. And you would fire up the sauna in the morning. And so it gets to be a really nice, soft kind of a heat. And it's none of these electric saunas. It's like really primal. It's fire and stone and water and steam. And, there's no light in the sauna. So there's a sense of being demure. And all of the women went in together. So my grandmother, my aunties, my mother, my female cousins, and all the men saunaed together. And I remember sitting in there and being little and looking at all these bodies and seeing myself in all these phases of life. And it was really a moment where I was like, that's what I'm going to look at like. And seeing the comfort and the lack of inhibition. I mean, we all came from the same clan and the same tribe. Then fast forward a few years later, and I think I was like 10 or 11, and my sister was 4 years older than me, so she was like 14 or 15, and she was like in that self-conscious phase of budding. And we're late bloomers in our family, and I was a late bloomer. So really, I was a little girl, but my sister put on her swimsuit. It was like the Olympic edition. We had matching ones. It was like this, Speedo with red, white, and blue and stars and whatever. And I did it because my sister did it and her sense of feeling consciousness. And we walked into the sauna and my grandmother said, Inge barna mitska ha simkostym i bastu. Like no child of mine is wearing a swimsuit in the sauna. And she immediately like pulled it off of us. And, it was like, there's no shame here. We don't hide ourselves. There's no shame. And then she picked up the scrub brush and oh my God, she scrubbed and scrubbed every part of us. And it was rigorous and methodical. And you were armed. It was like an assisted yoga practice. And she was scrubbing every part of us. And so I think that, again, like just seeing this tendency for, even when my mother came to visit from Finland and I had my yoga shala, and she made this comment and she was like, oh my God, everybody here, and this is the North Shore of Kauai too, where people live in bathing suits and it's very like an athletic community. And she was like, oh my God, you have to be thin and muscular and beautiful to live here. And everybody who goes to yoga appears to have to be that way. So it's like, are we missing the point? Mm-hmm. And I think it's really wonderful to have, there's also a lot of separation with communities. It's even manifesting in yoga where people, they don't have teachers. They're proud of not having teachers. Or what I also see is this trend where there isn't recognition of the teacher. And by not recognizing the teacher, suddenly your ego and personality. I came up with this and I said this. And the fact is that it weakens them because when you created a hashtag, I love it, lineage is leverage. And it's like, look, this is, it's like if you were giving presenting a, a thesis or science, it would have to be peer approved. Like there's peer approved resources. And so it's like, I didn't invent this. Look, this is corroborated. And this is what I'm sharing. Like, this is trustworthy information because it's been tested over time. So, this egoism where I'm owning the knowledge and I'm the one and I'm not recognizing this person because really it's like this grab for power and for status is occurring. And really, yoga is about appreciating the full face, the full circle of love. I'm not the first, I'm not the last. Here's somebody who's older. This is what it looks like for that person. And I know for me, a lot of the way that I learned was watching how my teacher taught other people in classes and worked with them individually, even in a general class situation. So by doing that, we're going to start to gain insight because we're going to be in that phase ourselves. How do you work when someone's postpartum? How do you work with somebody who has come out of an injury or who's going through hormonal changes or who's older? How do you set them up in a shoulder stand versus somebody else? Do you put them in Viparita Karani? Do you use the wall? Do you use the chair? Do you even invert them in a shoulder stand? You could teach it standing against the wall.
Right.
So there's a lot for somebody who knows what they're doing, who's actually been raised in a tradition. And I'm not talking about like a 100-hour training or 500-hour training, but works over time. You're going to see the evolution, and it's going to help you to hold space for a larger repertoire that appreciates the timing is everything in your life. I think we just found the name of this podcast.
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And it's important. It really is, I know that everything is an arc and everything is a wave. And because yoga is so practical, it'll kind of have its resurgence. It's gonna it's going to be hot and sexy, and then then somebody will find something else that will be the it thing or au courant. But you know, I I I feel tender about that. I have a tender spot, and part of that is in my astrology. I mean, my nakshatra is Shravana. I came in seated with this capacity to pull from the old strands and weave them into the current moment and to keep that love transmission alive. And I just so it saddens me in this careeristic, individualistic power grab where people are really coming from a place of insecurity. And that's where, like, when you have that teacher student relationship, the teacher's going to raise you up. They're going to raise you. They're going to cook you. They're going to pull things out of you. And you're standing on that foundation. And that's where it has deep roots and it can have branches that reach far and wide. And so I think people are really doing themselves a disservice when they're just trying to own it all. Or, it's like Martine Prechtel says, that 13th thank you which is things that can't be marketed, can't be packaged, can't even be spoken about. It's the essence at the root, and that's something that we share with each other. It's it's called like the Amrita, which is the elixir of immortality. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to die, but that this elixir is something that is beyond timing
Yeah.
and appreciates all of the cycles, and that you will eventually evaporate, you know? But like there is potency in recognizing the source. And not that any of us are the source, but we are um, a channel for that source.
It reminds me of this phrase, I'm self-made, and I feel very much in the vein of no one is self-made. There's no way. It's like we all I think you were saying that like we evolve in relationship, we evolve in community. It's like that deepening of love, whether it's your infant or your spouse or your friend or just someone that keeps showing up to yoga the same day of the week you do, is that in community we really evolve each other and we're seen and we have the ability to be seen.
And I wish I knew more about this, but I was just talking to Sherry Cassidy, who edited my book, and she's definitely an intellectual and, leaning on the mystical side. And she was studying through Richard Rohr's Living School. I think it's a 2-year course. And there was some kind of like study. There's a lot of science behind it as well. A metric that if a community exceeds 100 people, it starts to break down. And that when the communities are small is when there's like this larger sense of organism that is able to hold space for each other, and we're tapped into each other. When it gets too big, there's a disconnect. But that community also needs to include everyone in the community, not just the white 30, 20 to 50-year-olds, privileged people, but
Thin,
really,
fit, good looking.
yeah, that it includes everybody. And, as much as I have mixed feelings about Boga Journal, I mean, Yoga Journal, I do appreciate that a number of years ago, they made a shift where it's like, okay, we're not just going to put white, bendy women or white, sinewy, muscular men on the cover. We're going to appreciate that, like, there's people of all shapes and sizes, and yoga's for everyone. Not every type of yoga is for everyone, as Krishnamacharya said, but yoga is for everyone. And that's where it's fun, right? Because you never get tired because you're actually working with individuals, and that helps you to see yourself too.
I relish the challenge when people with injury or people with just less physical ability, for whatever reason, come into my class, and to it goes beyond the narrative of like I'm not enough or I can't do this, and it's so cool what happens in the classroom when all of these mix of people come together and are doing the same thing but not the same form.
Yeah, you're the real deal. You are.
So
Everyone, you need to go to Shanae's classes. Arizona and the high desert, it's beautiful. You won't regret it. Yeah, absolutely. That's a gift.
thank you. Thank you. Well, I have great teachers. So speaking of the community, one of the words that comes to mind is the commons. And often we go to a yoga class, And I remember in your studio in at Yoga Hanalei, you had tea, and people could stay and have tea. And it was so sweet. And many people did, and many people just got up and left, and that was fine. And there's room for that. And I often hear from my students, like, oh, you want to go get a coffee, or oh, it's so nice to see you again. And I feel like there is a lack of just space. And I don't know if you have thoughts on how to continue the commons, how to create them. Um, is it is it even necessary? I don't know.
I agree. I mean, I felt, yeah, and it was actually quite a journey of like dialing in the perfect samovar. And, I made trips to Oahu and finally found like the big, I wanted stainless steel that was going to cook water, and I could, make alchemy with the herbs and the tea that I shared. And it's also, for me, it was the feeling that this just wasn't just like, it wasn't transactional. It was transactional. And that, yeah, taking time to get to know each other. And this is where also, this is like, what is the yoga anyway? Is it about relationship? Is it just about exercise? Is it about um, creating community, having deeper conversations, expanded capacity for intimacy and sharing? And, that's something that I feel like, we've become so isolated, and we know that, depression is really on the steady incline. And rather than just fixing it with filling yourself with empty things, or distracting yourself, or just even the way that we don't really self-regulate anymore. If it gets cold, we turn on the heat. If it gets hot, we turn on the air conditioning. If it's dark outside, we turn on a light. It's like feeling yourself as part of a bigger rhythm. And in the tradition of yoga, there was always room for conversation. And that's a really important time. And it's like getting to know each other, and really it's an act of care of building those relationships. And I think for me particularly, it was really important because I'm first generation American, and I don't have family in this country. So that sense of creating what we call Hanai, like in the islands and the Polynesian tradition, they're because this isn't America, even though it's become very much Americanized, there is that tradition of Ohana and of Hanai. Hanai is where you adopt other people into your family. And Ohana is that sense of family. That's a bigger community where we take care of each other, and we're in tune with each other, and we know about each other. And, maybe because it's an island and there is that sense of smaller community, we can keep our fingers on the heartbeat of another. And having time for these conversations, that sense of sangata, um, that's something that I've really tried to foster, because there just isn't space for it in an asana class. And certainly we can thread in sutras, but like in the original tradition of yoga, there was space for the student to ask the mentor. And it's believed, and it's proven, and I've seen it in myself, it's like you let the student direct to a certain degree their education, because they're going to ask the question for what they're ready for next. And it's basically something they're already, like it said, that we don't ask a question for anything that we don't already know the answer to. So then it becomes an affirmation, and it also allows there to be a larger contextualizing, and it's an opportunity for the seasoned wisdom, the sharing. And a lot of times that seasoned wisdom might be like, yeah, you're going to be fat for a couple of years. You know what I mean? Like it's going to suck. You're going to feel like, and just validating that for you. And this too will pass, or you don't need to worry about that, or that's something you need to look at. So it's perhaps why yoga has become kind of stale in some ways, because then it just becomes a product, something that we're dishing out, and there really isn't nourishment. It's not like a potlatch, where people are feeding each other and there's deeper conversations. And I know that that's what really nourishes me, because there's everybody comes with so much, and I want to understand, and I want to feel into their hearts. Even though maybe they sought me out, some part of me was seeking them out as well. And as I've said so many times, and I mean it sincerely, like, isn't it amazing that we found each other? That we've got each other's backs. So that's where, really the mentorship has come on. And even that's a struggle, right? In some ways, because I just have an hour to unpack the sutra, and then there's time afterwards. But really, like, we could spend a whole day together, but timing is everything. And not everybody can do that, because we're all like struggling in this economy, to make it work. So it's okay though, because, as Patanjali says, you're always going to leave something out, and it's okay to have that fire in your belly that is hungry, and to keep feeding it. That it's not going to all happen right now. And this is an ongoing process. Yeah. So having time for those conversations is really wonderful. And I see that you're doing some sutras with your students, which is great. It's really great. And is a lot of it conversation too?
Yeah, actually, I taught an immersion over the weekend. It was just a 3-day thing. But I did something brand new. I did an hour and a half of the first hour was restorative, just kind of just basic shapes, because it was after kind of a lunch break. And I downloaded all of my notes from a few of the sutra. And then at the end, I left about half an hour for a formal recapitulation process and sharing. And they loved it. They loved it. And in the past, it was a more like formal, like you do, like, we can take notes and, kind of that kind of thing. But just to have that process of sharing after a like of finding that baseline, after they were physically fed themselves, laid down in restoration, and then the sharing, and it was profound. People were so thankful for the opportunity to share and to listen.
Yeah, that's great, because it is, it's like it's all about feedback, right? And that's where it's like when you go to a class, at the end of class, where is that person who is guiding you through the class? Are they glued to their phone? Do they have a split in their personality where they shut down, where they're highly guarded or highly inhibited? And, we're all working with that stuff, but are they making the efforts to just be a true human being? Svarupa, and to be available. And this is really what we sign up for when we take that role of holding space for sacred community, is to be generous with our time with others, and generous. And that's, something that I, make the efforts to offer people who work with me. I'm like, look, this, if you do a training with me, like, here's my number. Give me a call if you have questions. Like, I'm here for you. This doesn't just like, it's not like you press pay and then it ends at this date. Like, let's keep being in conversation. And that's part of my duty and my privilege, is to support the flourishing and the adaptability within these communities that are being seeded from what was seeded in me. And that's really, that's like the gratifying part,
The privilege and the duty. I love that.
Yeah, and that we're growing each other. It's not like, oh, I already learned everything I'm going to learn from that teacher. It's like, have you, for me, I felt so blessed because I had those relationships with my teachers where I could just call them up and just see how they were doing. And then sometimes, the conversation, as we were opening our hearts and opening our minds to each other, there was just affirmation and stimulation and encouragement that occurred there. And there was nuance that I hadn't seen before. And of course, in their process, they had, like, new pathways open that lit things up or stirred things within me. Yeah,
Let's keep the conversation going. Keep
yeah,
it alive.
yeah.
Anything you want to share in our wrap up?
Um, what do I want to share? Like, our ideas, and so many of our ideas of what yoga is, or what self is, or what enlightenment is, they are simply that. They're notions. And the more that we isolate, the more we're going to alienate ourselves from the bigger diaspora. And certainly, yoga is this process of involution. It's kind of like, all right, well, that's what the teacher said. How does it feel for me? But also, it's like, this is where we're going to stretch each other and grow with each other. And we need something to lean into, and to leaning into something bigger is also making ourselves more available. And you know we don't need to, there really is no hierarchy in yoga. There's mutual respect. And that's where I feel really gratified, because I can just see the students who came to me and who trusted in me, and I raised them, in what's been raising me, where they have, like, they're on fire, they're inspired, they have this, this youth and sparkle that is so wonderful to see. And we're like, they're carrying it forward, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's not that I know any more or anything like that. I've just been cooking in it in a little bit longer. And this is the way that we support each other, and we develop a field of resonance that really transcends ideas of hierarchy. And it's really about continuity. And we can see that, it's like all through, like the Yoga Sutras, they are the key insights for how to, um, you know, bring back the sacred into our lives. It's not that we're becoming more holy or sacred. It's just that we're in love. We're getting beyond these ideas of something being right or wrong or better or worse. And we're seeing the continuity in it. And so it's like describe, dharana, highest ideation, dhyana, which is where we're in a place of confluence, and then samadhi, where there's like full transmission and exchange. This is that sense of like the, and that our breath is even, that there's like a seamlessness, and even that we may see like the ruts in the road or where we feel out of sorts, it's like we can hold that for each other. And that's what community is. So the sangata, the community, has always been a huge part of yoga. And how can you have community unless there is true relationship and connection and conversation? Otherwise, it becomes proselytizing, in which somebody is held um, on some kind of a dais. And that's where we're kind of missing the point. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's just such a real honor and a joy to have these conversations with you. Thank you.
I really feel that way too. Thanks, Shanae. I mean, you are, it looks like it's about me, but it's not about me, because without you, none of this would be happening. And you're just so good at going right to the heart. Thank you.
Namaskara.
Namaskara. Namastubhyam.